The House Intelligence Committee released a declassified summary of its findings at 9:43 a.m. this morning, revealing what it describes as a coordinated effort to subvert the constitutional process for certifying presidential election results. The 28-page document represents the first official congressional account of activities during the critical period between November 2020 and January 2021, drawing on classified intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and testimony from over 200 witnesses, including senior government officials, military leaders, and state election administrators. This is not a partisan report reflecting the views of one political party or a preliminary investigation subject to further review. This is the Intelligence Committee's formal assessment based on access to the most sensitive classified materials available to Congress, materials that include signals intelligence, human source reporting, and forensic analysis of encrypted communications that were recovered from secure government servers. Hit that subscribe button right now because the revelations in this declassified summary are more explosive than anyone anticipated. So what exactly does this Intelligence Committee summary reveal? The document begins with an executive summary stating that the committee has identified what it characterizes as a multi-pronged effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power through means that included pressuring state officials to alter certified election results, organizing fraudulent alternative elector slates, attempting to corrupt the Department of Justice certification process, and exploring the use of emergency powers to justify federal intervention in state election procedures. The summary states that the committee reviewed classified intelligence showing coordination among multiple actors, including White House officials, political operatives, attorneys, and state party leaders across at least 7 states. This coordination allegedly involved encrypted messaging applications, burner phones, and unofficial communication channels specifically designed to avoid creating official government records. The declassified summary provides specific details about the timeline and scope of these activities in language that is remarkably direct for an official congressional document. According to the committee's findings, planning for alternative strategies to contest election results began as early as October 2020, weeks before any votes were cast. Intelligence reports reviewed by the committee allegedly show discussions among senior campaign officials about scenarios where election results in key swing states could be challenged through legal proceedings, pressure on state legislatures, and ultimately through disruption of the January 6th congressional certification. The committee states that these discussions were not contingent on actual evidence of election fraud, but rather represented contingency planning for how to maintain power regardless of electoral outcomes. Smash that like button if you are beginning to grasp the significance of what this committee has documented. Here is where the intelligence findings become absolutely critical. The declassified summary reveals that the National Security Agency collected communications between certain domestic political actors and foreign entities that showed interest in American election disputes. While the summary does not identify the specific foreign governments involved, it states that intercepted communications revealed that foreign intelligence services were monitoring and in some cases attempting to amplify narratives about election fraud because they assessed that political chaos in the United States would serve their strategic interests. The committee's assessment is that while there is no evidence that domestic actors were knowingly coordinating with foreign entities, certain foreign governments sought to exploit election disputes to undermine confidence in American democratic institutions. The document goes into extensive detail about what it calls the alternative elector scheme. According to the committee's findings based on witness testimony and documentary evidence, individuals in 7 states were recruited to sign certificates claiming to be duly elected and qualified electors, even though they had not been certified by their state governments and had no legal authority to cast electoral votes. The summary states that these individuals were told by organizers that the certificates were needed as a contingency in case ongoing legal challenges to election results proved successful. However, the committee's investigation revealed that organizers understood the legal challenges had virtually no chance of success, and that the real purpose of the alternative elector certificates was to create a pretext for challenging the validity of certified electoral votes during the January 6th congressional proceeding. Now things get absolutely devastating. The declassified summary includes a detailed account of efforts to pressure the Department of Justice to provide official validation for claims of election fraud. According to testimony from former Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and other senior Justice Department officials, they were subjected to repeated meetings and phone calls in which they were urged to announce that the department had found evidence of significant election irregularities, even though investigative work had found no such evidence. The summary quotes from contemporaneous notes taken by department officials documenting specific instances where they were told that they did not need to actually investigate fraud claims thoroughly, but merely needed to say that irregularities existed and that states should consider recertifying their election results. Drop a comment right now if this timeline is making sense to you. I read every single one. The committee's findings make clear that when Justice Department officials refused to provide false validation for fraud claims, alternative strategies were explored, including the potential appointment of a new acting attorney general who would be willing to send official letters to state legislatures questioning the validity of certified results. The summary states that this plan was abandoned only after multiple senior Justice Department officials threatened to resign en masse if such an appointment was made. The committee characterizes this episode as an attempt to corrupt the independence of federal law enforcement for partisan political purposes. The most explosive section of the declassified summary addresses what the committee calls contingency planning for emergency powers. Based on classified documents obtained through subpoena and testimony from military and intelligence officials, the committee states that during December 2020 and early January 2021, various proposals were circulated exploring whether emergency declarations could be used to justify extraordinary federal actions. These proposals allegedly included using the military to seize voting equipment under the pretext of investigating foreign interference, invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy federal troops to major cities based on claims that election protests threatened public order, and declaring a national security emergency that would somehow justify delaying or invalidating the January 20th inauguration. The committee's findings include testimony from senior military officers who stated they were contacted through both official and back-channel communications to gauge their willingness to support such measures. The summary quotes directly from sworn testimony provided by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who stated that he made clear in every such conversation that the military would not involve itself in election disputes, and that any order to use military force to interfere with the constitutional transfer of power would be unlawful and would be refused. The committee states that multiple military leaders independently documented these conversations in official memoranda because they recognized the requests as potentially constituting unlawful orders. This is not the first time congressional committees have investigated efforts to interfere with democratic processes, but the scope and detail of the current findings place this investigation in rare historical company. The Senate Watergate Committee's investigation of the Nixon administration uncovered systematic abuse of presidential power, including using federal agencies to target political opponents. But that investigation focused primarily on covering up illegal campaign activities rather than on efforts to overturn election results. The Iran-Contra investigations of the 1980s revealed that executive branch officials had circumvented congressional restrictions on foreign policy. But those activities did not involve attempts to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power. The closest historical parallel may be the congressional investigations following the Civil War that examined how secession and armed rebellion against constitutional authority were organized and executed. Subscribe immediately if you have not yet. This historical analysis does not exist anywhere else, but even those post-Civil War investigations dealt with actors who openly rejected constitutional authority and attempted to form a separate government. What makes the current Intelligence Committee findings so significant is that they document efforts to subvert constitutional processes while maintaining the appearance of operating within legal frameworks. The alternative elector scheme, the pressure on Justice Department officials, and the exploration of emergency powers were all presented as legitimate constitutional options rather than as attempts to override electoral outcomes through extra-legal means. So what allegedly distinguishes these activities from normal political and legal challenges to election results? The declassified summary addresses this question directly by drawing clear distinctions between lawful post-election activities and the conduct documented in the committee's investigation. The summary acknowledges that candidates have every right to pursue legal challenges to election procedures through court proceedings, to request recounts where state law permits, and to advocate for changes in election administration. What crosses the line, according to the committee's analysis, is using fraudulent electoral certificates, pressuring law enforcement officials to provide false validation for baseless claims, and exploring the use of military or emergency powers to prevent the constitutionally mandated transfer of presidential authority. The legal implications of the committee's findings extend well beyond the specific individuals involved in the activities documented. The declassified summary makes multiple criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, recommending investigation of potential violations of federal statutes, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to impede or injure an officer, and seditious conspiracy. Each of these referrals is supported by specific citations to testimony and documentary evidence that the committee believes establishes probable cause that crimes were committed. While criminal referrals from congressional committees carry no legal force and do not compel prosecution, they create significant political and legal pressure on the Justice Department to thoroughly investigate the matters referred. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. The committee's decision to make these referrals public through the declassified summary represents a significant escalation. By laying out the evidentiary basis for each referral in a public document, the committee is essentially challenging the Justice Department to either pursue the recommended charges or to explain publicly why the evidence does not support prosecution. This creates accountability mechanisms that make it far more difficult for prosecutors to quietly decline cases based on political considerations rather than on the merits of the evidence. So let us break down the specific criminal referrals and the evidence supporting each one. The first referral addresses conspiracy to defraud the United States, a federal statute that prohibits two or more persons from conspiring to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of any department or agency of the federal government. The committee's summary states that the alternative elector scheme meets the elements of this offense because it involved multiple individuals working together to create fraudulent electoral certificates specifically designed to impede the lawful function of Congress in counting and certifying electoral votes. The summary cites testimony from alternative electors themselves who stated they were told their participation was necessary for contingency purposes, along with communications among organizers showing they understood the certificates would be used to challenge the validity of the January 6th proceeding. The second criminal referral addresses obstruction of an official proceeding, which prohibits corruptly interfering with or attempting to interfere with congressional proceedings. The committee's assessment is that efforts to pressure Vice President Pence to reject certified electoral votes combined with the submission of fraudulent alternative elector certificates constituted corrupt attempts to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6th. The summary includes extensive evidence from the Vice President's legal counsel and staff documenting the pressure campaign, along with legal analyses from constitutional scholars explaining that the Vice President's role in counting electoral votes is purely ministerial and provides no authority to reject votes certified by states. Don't go anywhere. The most legally significant referrals are coming next. The third criminal referral addresses conspiracy to impede or injure an officer, a statute that prohibits conspiring to prevent federal officers from discharging their duties. The committee's findings state that the pressure campaign directed at Vice President Pence, state election officials, and Department of Justice personnel meets the elements of this offense. The summary cites testimony from state election officials in multiple states describing threats and intimidation designed to pressure them to alter or reject certified election results, along with the documented efforts to force Justice Department officials to provide false validation for fraud claims. The fourth and most serious criminal referral addresses seditious conspiracy, which prohibits conspiring to use force or intimidation to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of federal law. The committee's summary states that planning to use emergency declarations or military deployments to prevent the constitutionally mandated transfer of presidential power on January 20th could constitute seditious conspiracy if such planning involved agreements to use coercive federal authority to obstruct the execution of constitutional requirements. The summary acknowledges that this is the most complex and difficult charge to prove because it requires demonstrating specific intent to interfere with governmental functions through unlawful force or intimidation rather than through legal and political processes. And here's what makes the committee's findings particularly damning. The declassified summary includes extensive discussion of the intent requirement for each of these potential offenses. In criminal law, proving corrupt intent or criminal purpose is often the most challenging element of prosecution. However, the committee states that recovered communications contain explicit discussions showing that key actors understood their activities had no legitimate legal basis and were designed purely to create chaos and delay that might somehow prevent the inauguration from proceeding on schedule. The summary quotes from encrypted messages where organizers acknowledged that legal challenges to election results had failed and that alternative strategies were needed to maintain power. The political implications of this declassified summary extend far beyond immediate legal proceedings. This fundamentally alters the political landscape because it provides an official congressional account of events based on classified intelligence and extensive witness testimony. While partisan disputes will certainly continue about the interpretation and significance of these findings, the existence of a formal Intelligence Committee assessment supported by classified sources creates a baseline of established facts that will shape public discourse and political debate going forward. Candidates and elected officials will now be forced to respond to specific factual findings rather than being able to dismiss investigations as purely partisan exercises. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you understand the congressional investigation process. The declassified summary includes detailed appendices listing the categories of classified materials reviewed by the committee, the legal authorities under which the investigation was conducted, and the procedures used to protect sources and methods while making findings public. This level of methodological transparency is significant because it allows the public and other oversight bodies to assess whether the committee's conclusions are supported by credible evidence subjected to rigorous analysis. The summary specifically notes that the committee's work was reviewed by the Intelligence Community Inspector General and by House General Counsel to ensure that all findings are based on admissible evidence and that no classified sources or methods are compromised by the declassified release. Here's what makes it even more extraordinary. The declassified summary addresses potential counterarguments and alternative explanations for the evidence it presents. The document acknowledges that some witnesses claimed they believed they were operating within legal boundaries and were simply exploring all available constitutional options for challenging election results they believed to be fraudulent. The committee's response is that good faith belief in election fraud does not justify using fraudulent electoral certificates, pressuring law enforcement to provide false statements, or planning to use military force to prevent constitutional processes from proceeding. The summary notes that the appropriate mechanism for challenging election results is through the court system, and that when those legal challenges failed across more than 60 separate lawsuits, pursuing extra-legal alternatives represented a fundamental abandonment of constitutional processes. This goes far beyond questions about one election or one individual's conduct. It is about whether the American constitutional system has enforceable boundaries that prevent those who lose elections from using governmental power to overturn electoral outcomes. The Intelligence Committee's findings represent a formal congressional determination that certain activities during the 2020 transition crossed those boundaries and potentially violated federal criminal law. That determination now becomes part of the official record that will inform how historians, legal scholars, and future generations understand this period in American history. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here is the situation we are facing. The House Intelligence Committee has released a declassified summary documenting what it characterizes as a coordinated effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power through alternative elector schemes, pressure on law enforcement officials, and exploration of emergency powers, including potential military deployments. The 28-page summary is based on classified intelligence, intercepted communications, and testimony from over 200 witnesses. the committee has made formal criminal referrals to the Department of Justice recommending investigation of conspiracy, obstruction, and seditious conspiracy charges. When congressional intelligence committees release formal assessments based on classified sources and make multiple criminal referrals supported by extensive evidentiary citations, we have entered genuinely unprecedented territory. This is not political theater or partisan accusation. This is the intelligence oversight apparatus of Congress exercising its constitutional responsibility to investigate potential abuses of power and to make formal recommendations for criminal prosecution when evidence warrants. The declassified summary provides a detailed factual account that will now serve as a baseline for ongoing legal proceedings, political debates, and historical assessment. Keep a close eye on how the Justice Department responds to these criminal referrals. Prosecutors now face significant pressure to either bring charges consistent with the committee's recommendations or to provide public explanations for why the evidence does not support prosecution. The committee has effectively put the evidence on the record in a way that makes it very difficult to ignore or to quietly decline without accountability. Meanwhile, state-level investigations continue to advance in parallel, creating multiple potential avenues for legal accountability beyond federal proceedings. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here is where things stand right now. The Intelligence Committee has completed its investigation and released its findings publicly. The declassified summary documents a multifaceted effort to subvert constitutional processes through fraudulent electoral certificates, corruption of law enforcement independence, and exploration of military deployments to prevent the transfer of power. Criminal referrals have been made to federal prosecutors with detailed evidentiary support. The official congressional record now includes formal findings that certain activities potentially violated federal conspiracy, obstruction, and seditious conspiracy statutes. This is not just another investigation that will be forgotten after a few news cycles. This is a defining moment where Congress has exercised its constitutional oversight authority to investigate potential abuses of presidential power and has made formal determinations about whether criminal laws may have been violated. The declassified summary will serve as a historical record of this period and as a warning about how democratic processes can be threatened when those who lose elections refuse to accept electoral outcomes and instead pursue extra-legal means to maintain power. The findings have been released, the criminal referrals have been made, and the constitutional accountability mechanisms are now engaged in ways that will shape American democracy for generations to come. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you are finding value in this coverage. What happens next in terms of actual criminal prosecutions will determine whether these formal congressional findings translate into legal accountability or whether they remain primarily as historical documentation of a constitutional crisis that the system survived but did not fully resolve.